Hey guys, back with part two. We're still in chapter, I believe, 22. Zopa said Peak's ready to summit, which is really cool. Peak got in a fight with his dad, however, or Josh, whatever you want to call him, and he is calling his mom. Got to talk to his little sisters as well. All right, so Peak asked, "How's Rolf?" "He's out of town on a business trip. He'll be back tonight, and he's going to be upset that he missed your call." Mom sighed. "Peak, I gave it my best shot to try to talk you out of trying for the summit. But now the decision has been made. You need to focus on the task. You can't think about me, Paula, Patrice, Rolf, or anyone else. To stay alive, you are going to have to think only about yourself." "Do you know why I quit climbing?" "Yeah," I said. "You fell from the wall in back of—" "No," she interrupted. "I quit because of you." "What?" "With some work, I could have gotten my climbing conditioning back. In fact, the reason I went for that climb that day I fell was because Josh wanted me to get back on the circuit with him. Just before I fell, I was thinking about what would happen if a rattlesnake slithered up to my baby strapped in his car seat down below. If I'd been thinking about the climb, I would have realized the rock I grabbed was loose before I put weight on it. To climb at Josh's level, you have to be completely selfish, Peak. When you were born, I couldn't do that anymore. I have no doubt you have the physical ability to summit Everest, or any other mountain you want. But you may not have the ability to not care. For the next few weeks, you have to harden yourself inside. Your guts and heart need to be stone cold. I didn't do a lot of high altitude when I was climbing, but I did enough to know that the thin air messes with your brain. You need to forget everything and concentrate on the climb. You have enough experience to know when it's over. And when it's over, don't take another step higher. If you do, it could be over for good. Turn around. There's no shame in it. Live to climb another day. When you come back down, I hope that good and caring heart of yours thaws. It's the most important muscle you have. I love you, Peak." And with that, she cut the connection. I don't know how long I laid there thinking about what she said, but I can tell you there were plenty of tears. As the blue light through the tent faded to dark, I was still lying there when the flap opened. It was Josh. "You have the sat phone?" I sat up. "Yeah, sorry. I should have brought it back." I gave it to him. "So, you talked to your mom?" "Yes." "One thing we need to get straight," he said. "Getting Sunjo to the top is not a backup plan. I'm giving him a shot because I owe him and Zopa." "What do you mean?" "2 years ago, Kitar saved my life." "Sunjo's father?" "Up on K2. "You're the climber who survived." "We'd been snowed in for 3 days. No food, no O's, no hope of survival. I watched my climbing party die one by one until I was the only one left. I should have been next, but Kitar came up the mountain through the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. He came alone. None of the other Sherpas would come with him. He all but carried me back down. When we got to base, we stumbled into the aid tent. I took one cot. Kitar took the other. While Leah was treating my frostbite and giving me IV fluids, the man who saved my life died not 4 feet away from me. His heart gave out. I didn't even get a chance to thank him. I thought you ought to know." He closed the flap, and I heard his footsteps crunch through the snow as he walked away. It's a good chapter. Mom's speech about having to be very selfish when you're climbing. And that's followed up by Josh's story about a man who was not selfish, Sunjo's father, who saved Josh, but ended up dying because of it. Very interesting stuff. Keep going. The next chapter is called Unrest. Being selfish and focused turned out not to be a problem. After Josh dropped the K2 bomb in my tent, he dropped a second bomb on his clients. He told them about his plan to get me to the summit. I wasn't invited to the meeting, but I certainly experienced the aftermath of the explosion the next morning. I slept late and woke up sore and famished. I had snowed, it had snowed a couple of feet during the night, and I had to dig my way out of the tent. When I finally got to my feet and looked around, I was surprised how much the camp had emptied out. I guess I was so upset the day before I hadn't noticed. Most of the big commercial operations were still in place, but it looked like at least a third of the smaller expeditions had pulled up stakes. I glanced up at Captain Sheck's compound, and was tempted to give him a wave, but decided not to. I didn't have time for juvenile antics. I had to stay focused and disciplined if I wanted to get to the summit. Besides, I was starving and the delicious white smoke billowing from the mess tent was calling to me. Inside was food, warmth, and conversation. But I was a little worried about the conversation part. I didn't want to get too close to anyone and catch the bug that was threatening everyone's climb. I needn't have worried about the conversation part because as soon as I stepped inside, all the conversation ceased. The only sound was the hiss of the gas burner and the chatter of the lid on the boiling noodle pot. There were 10 people inside the tent, and they were all staring at me. None of them were smiling. I would have turned around and left if I wasn't so hungry. Speak of the devil, a cowboy from Abilene drawled. He looked like he had lost 20 pounds since the last time I saw him. In fact, all the climbers looked like they had dropped weight. None of them were eating. What's going on? I said as casually as I could, with 10 pairs of eyes glaring at me. I walked to the shelf and grabbed a plate. We're having a meeting, someone said. A private meeting, someone else said. That was obvious. There wasn't a single person from HQ there. No cook, no film crew, no Sherpas. I'm just getting something to eat, I said. I'll only take a minute, and I'll get out of your way. Well, the cowboy said, while we got you here, maybe you can fill us in on when you found out your daddy was planning to put you on top of the mountain. What goes around comes around. Now I knew how Sunjo must have felt the week before. I scooped a pile of noodles onto my plate, but my appetite was quickly going away. Not until I got over here, I hedged. Then I put a forkful of noodles in my mouth, hoping I wouldn't have to answer any more questions on my way out of the door with my plate. Of course, you realize the noodles you're eating, the plate they're on, and maybe even the parka you're wearing were paid for by the people sitting in this mess tent. This was an exaggeration, but he had a point. So I set my plate on the table and walked out, hoping that one of them would call me back and say they were kidding. No one did. The HQ tent was less hostile, but not much cheerier. Josh, Thaddeus, Leia, and the others seemed to have been having a meeting of their own. I was just over at the mess tent, I said. How's their mood? Thaddeus asked. Ugly. I'll get over it, Josh said. Been a rough climbing season, what with the weather and everything, everyone getting sick. Seen it all before. As soon as we get a couple people to the top, everything will be fine. No one else in the room seemed to share his optimism, least of all Thaddeus, who said that he thought the climbers would sue peak experience and would probably win. Did you tell them about Sunjo? I asked. Nah, Josh said. That would have sent them over the edge. That's our little secret. Although Shek seems to have figured it out. We're going to shift everything again. Zopa, Sunjo, Yogi, and Yash are the C team. They're still on our climbing permit, but they're on their own. Peak, you're on the A team with me. We'll divide the film crew between the teams. As soon as JR is better, we'll start him filming the A and B teams. We probably won't use any of the footage, but the fact of being interviewed for the documentary might improve their attitudes. He looked at Leia. What's your best guess about when this virus will run its course? A week, maybe longer. She looked like she was suffering from it too. The bigger problem is the after effects. Because we can't exercise and can't keep food down, we're losing our conditioning. Even under ideal circumstances, it will be difficult for any of us to summit. There's nothing we can do about that, Josh said. We'll either make it or we won't, and that's no different from any other year. The tent flap opened, and the Texan stepped inside. Glad you're all here, he said. We've been talking, and we thought you'd like to know that none of us are climbing with the boy. We didn't spend our money, time, and effort to get a kid up on the summit. He looked at me. It's nothing personal, son. I think you landed right in the middle of this mess just like we did. Thanks for telling me, Josh said. But I decide who goes to the summit and who's on what team. The Texan gave him a hard smile. Well, Josh, you're the boss. But if you decide we have to climb with your boy, then we're not climbing at all. We'll head home and y'all have to deal with our lawyers. Well, y'all might as well pack up and leave today, Josh said angrily. 2 or 3 years from now, you might win your case and maybe even get some of your money back. But none of you will have made it to the top of the world. If the Texan had had a six-shooter strapped around his waist, I think he would have drawn it. Instead, he glared at Josh for a moment, then stomped out of the tent. He's bluffing, Josh said confidently. Thaddeus didn't look nearly as confident, nor did anyone else. In keeping with my mother's suggestion about being selfish, I did not step forward and offer to give up my spot. I might have, if I thought Josh would refuse my selfless sacrifice for the team, but I wasn't sure what he would do. The argument we'd had from the day before was far from resolved. Nobody had mentioned it, but the delay from my team change meant that there was a good chance I wouldn't get to the summit before my 15th birthday. Both Josh and Thaddeus had to have figured that out. The bottom line was that if Sunjo made it to the top, they didn't need me. The next couple of days, I kept a low profile, which wasn't hard since no one wanted anything to do with me. Josh's clients didn't pack up and leave, but they didn't back off either. I think they were sticking around to see if Josh would back off. There were no more complaints about my eating their food in the mess tent, but the silent treatment and resentful glares continued. Instead of getting enmeshed in the mountain madness, I went climbing. One thing Camp 4 had taught me was that I needed to hone my ice climbing techniques. I think one of the reasons I had had such a difficult time climbing to the col was my clumsy crampon moves. I hadn't done a lot of ice climbing. Efficiency saves energy, and energy is as elusive as air the higher you go. I found an ice wall about a half mile outside of camp and spent hours every day trying different routes to the top. I slipped, fell, and scraped myself, but I got a little better with each climb. At night, I stayed in my tent writing in my second moleskin and tried to visualize my final assault on the summit. I even went so far as to make a special prayer flag. I took one of the yellow flags and carefully drew a mountain on it with a blue Sharpie. I hung it inside my tent, staring at it for hours. On top of the summit is a pole buried in the ice with a metal wire hanging from it, with dozens of prayer flags beating by the wind. Over and over I imagined myself struggling up to that pole and tagging Everest. Captain Shek was still looking for Sunjo. Every morning when I headed to the wall, he had a soldier follow me. I guess he thought my practice climbs were a ruse to meet secretly with the mystery boy. I actually didn't mind being followed. If I had an accident, at least there would be someone to help me or run back to base and get help. Zopa, Yogi, and Yash were staying at base camp but keeping a low profile. I saw them once in a while, but we hadn't spoken since we got back. I suspected Captain Shek was watching them too, and they were keeping their distance. On the third day, we got word that 9 climbers had reached the summit from the north side, virtually every climber who tried that day. Now, you would think this news would be received with great joy. On the surface, it was. But just below the surface, there was a great deal of jealousy and resentment. If we hadn't gotten sick, if Josh hadn't abandoned us on the trip to the mountain, if he hadn't brought his son to Everest, that could have been us. We could have been headed home in a few days. There may not be another window. And other complaints were whispered just loud enough for me to hear in the mess tent that evening during dinner. The carping was interrupted by the appearance of Josh and Thaddeus, along with the film crew. I hadn't seen any of them in the mess tent since I returned from Camp 4. Like the other climbers, JR, Jack, and Will had lost weight and still looked a little weak, but better than they had on the way down. We gotta stop there. It's the end of part 2, and we're almost done this chapter. See you in the next part, guys. Hope you're having a great week.